All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. And thank you all so much for joining me today and spending your time listening to this ridiculous show that's been going on for so long. And the only reason it's been continuing is because of listeners just like you and listeners who send in their questions. And today is going to be a question type episode. I know in the past my most recent episode was having some experts on, which is fantastic, and I love having those. But today we're getting back to what the Fearcast is all about, which is your questions. So this is a question and answer based podcast. If you have a question about OCD or anxiety or some factor about OCD or something real specific or something really broad or something really kind of fundamental and foundational or something real specific, I want to hear about it. We all want to hear about it. So this question is coming from an audio question. So somebody used the button over the new button, the brand new button. Before I get into that, all right, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a question and answer based podcast. I already established that. So go over to fearcastpodcast.com and you can send me your questions. You can certainly send me your question. It is anonymous. I will ask for your name and your email address just for legal reasons, but that goes nowhere. I hide it. In fact, you, the listener, can give me whatever name you want to read, and I will read that. And in fact, I don't even know off the top of my head the person's name who sent this one to me. Ed? Maybe? Anyways, the point is, your information is going to be kept secret. So the other part is if you send an audio question and that question goes to the tippity top of the list, as is what's happening today. So there are three ways that you can send me a question. Number one, you can go over to Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over at Instagram. That's where I put out also a bunch of, silly posts or a bunch of informational things, or I'm trying to do more videos, so we'll see. But you can go and send me a DM over there, click the little microphone button in the little text box, record your audio, it will send it to me. The other way, now the newest way, and perhaps even the easiest way, and you'll hear why. One reason why we're getting an audio question today is because someone just does not want to use Instagram, and trust me, I get it. I don't love social media, and yet here we are in social media land. So you can go over to Fearcast Podcast. There's going to be a button at the top of the page. Click on that button, and you can record your voice right then and there, and it will get to me. I will put it up on a future episode, and today I'm putting it up on this episode. So the last way you can get your audio question is you can record your voice, and you can email it to me at questions@fearcastpodcast.com. Super easy to do that. I may send you email back just asking for permission, but it doesn't matter. You get the idea. So thank you all so much again for joining me today. If you're watching me over at Instagram, hello, you can see what I look like, and I'm sorry for that, but for those of you, you're welcome for that. So pick your poison however it works for you. So for today's audio question is actually kind of a fun one because it's in response to an episode I did a couple episodes back on emotional contamination. So someone asked a follow-up question about emotional contamination, and look, I'm here for that. If I put out an episode and I didn't explain something clearly or raised another question, that's what this podcast is all about. There's so much information out there now, which is great. And if you're wanting some specific information or a specific clinician's information or thoughts on it, specifically this one right here, I'm more than happy to look this up and try to answer as best I possibly can. So I'm going to share the audio question with you shortly, and then I'll get into my discussion, because not only is it in response to the emotional contamination, it kind of broadens it out to something that is called Fixity of Beliefs. So it's kind of a weird word. And when I first heard it in my training for OCD and anxiety disorders, I'm like, fixity, that's not even a word. It doesn't matter. It's what we use in OCD land and anxiety land. So it's the word that we use. We'll talk about it in a moment. So here is the question.
Hi, Kevin. I really enjoyed the podcast, and I was very happy to see that you added a voicemail widget to the homepage so that I can send you a voice message without Instagram. I enjoyed the episode on emotional contamination OCD earlier this week and was interested if you had any thoughts on how treatment might be different in cases of emotional contamination OCD where the person with OCD has low insight, so where they believe that their fears might genuinely come true or at least are worth taking seriously on some level. I'm mainly interested in emotional contamination OCD here, but if there are other subtypes that you think might also be of interest to the class, I'd definitely be interested in hearing that. Thank you.
All right. So that was the question. I think it's a great question because, yes, while they're specifically interested in getting information on emotional contamination, they're also wanting to know just kind of broadly, kind of like, what do you do when someone has a belief, someone has their thought, someone has their obsession, and they genuinely believe that to be true or genuinely believe that outcome is likely to happen. Now, we talk about, and I talk about this a lot, that OCD thoughts are ego dystonic. The obsession is ego dystonic, right? Syntonic means it meshes with what they believe, what they believe to be true, what they want to be true about their life, the goal in their life. It is kind of like, think of like symphony, right? It is in concert with themselves and they believe it to be accurate, right? Dystonic is inaccurate. It is out of sync with who they are and what they would like to be, right? So ego dystonic beliefs are what OCD obsessions tend to be. They're like, having a thought about hurting someone when you're not a violent person. You go like, well, I don't really want to do that. And there's this, and we've also talked about this element too, that there's this part of the anxious or the OCD mind that like deep down, like in your heart of hearts, you don't believe that outcome is likely to happen, and you don't believe that thought is true, right? So I know we've talked about it in that way quite a bit, but there can be a range of how much you do believe that, right? Because there's this part of you that believes it to be likely or possible at the very least. And there's this part of you that believes it's not true and not likely to happen and, ridiculous even. And, that's where the comment comes in where, someone comes in, they go, I go, hey, what's bothering you? And they go like, ugh, Kevin, you're going to think this is ridiculous. And that's coming from that part of their brain that genuinely believes or, partially believes that it's not going to happen, but partially they do. So there's this spectrum. So what we call this in therapy land is fixity of belief. So how fixed this belief is in your mind. Now, for someone, fixity beliefs or the rigidity with which someone holds this belief can range and can range from holding very loosely and having great insight into the fact that it's an unlikely connection to someone who may have low insight and have extreme fixity of beliefs. Now, that extreme fixity of beliefs can also kind of lean on the side of a little bit of kind of delusion, right? Delusion is ultimately just the word that we use to describe a belief that pretty much no one else believes, right? But they rigidly hold that. And again, it's on this spectrum, so not everybody is going to be the same, right? So someone who has a really kind of rigid or fixed belief and having low insight in treatment, it doesn't mean treatment is impossible. It just means treatment is likely to be a little slower than expected or even desired, right? So because what we're combating is someone's rigid belief about whether or not this thing is going to happen. If they don't have a strong belief that the outcome is likely to happen, they're likely to push into their fear and face the discomfort and overcoming that fear and learning that fear is unlikely to happen and that they can handle the anxiety is a heck of a lot easier than someone who genuinely believes that something bad is going to happen, right? Fixity beliefs can range from person to person and from subtype to subtype. I often see it really pronounced in kind of religious or moral scrupulosity because someone who is religious or spiritual genuinely has a belief in supernatural things that are intangible, consequences such as an unwanted outcome in the afterlife or unwanted favor with gods or spiritual life or the supernatural, right? Morality as well is one where someone gets really rigidly held into this, where they genuinely believe what it means to be a good person or a bad person, or the thing that they're doing is right or that thing that they're doing is wrong. And it's tough to push against that, right? So, so we kind of talked a little bit about already the kind of range, right? It's like good insight, medium insight where they kind of have that medium belief, right? And then poor insight where they just have this delusional idea about what is and is not going to happen, right? So something to so as we're kind of working with this, right? The typical approach we would work with someone if they have, kind of good insight or kind of medium insight is we first went through cognitive restructuring. We're going to try to challenge that thought. Now, I'm going to get into more specifics about like what this looks like for emotional contamination and perhaps even for some other things. But when it comes to things like, or when it comes to treatment and what that starts to look like, is we'd start to challenge the legitimacy of that thought, right? We'd say like, how confident are you this thing is going to happen? Have you seen this thing happen elsewhere? Have you experienced this in your life before? More often than not, people are going to say, well, I haven't really seen anybody experience this outcome, or I don't really know of anybody who's had this outcome. But there's this part of me that thinks it's true, or I fear that it's true. Right. Another situation or another subtype that can have this a lot is real event OCD. Real event OCD is that subtype of obsessive compulsive disorder where someone has actually experienced something or has gone through something. There's a real event. Whereas, the other subtypes, generally speaking, they're speculative, they're potential, right? What if this does happen? What if this could be true? What if I do this in the future, right? They're what ifs, they're maybes, they're future based oftentimes, right? Or they're kind of fantasy based, right? What if this thing may kind of happen? Real event has the distinct disadvantage of being rooted in something that actually happened to somebody, and oftentimes that fear is then, well, what if I experience a negative consequence in the future? Or what if something comes from this? Right? There is a fantasy component to that about the future, but it's kind of rooted in something that genuinely happened to them, and in all of that, the job is of the clinician and the job of the individual is really to consider that from a different angle, right? To consider like how likely, how firmly how certain are you that this is going to happen, right? A question that I've used in my practice and I really like is to think about like I'll ask somebody, maybe you can ask yourself this is like who's the most reasonable, logical, and rational person that you know in your life? And they'll name a person. I go, all right, so if you were to go up to that person and say like, hey, so and so, if I you know if I do X, I'm pretty sure Y is going to happen. I mean, what do you think? Are they going to go like, oh yeah, that's definitely going to happen, you should certainly avoid that? I mean, we can think about that like in the context of emotional contamination, where you think somebody, say like, hey, if I'm in the same room as my brother, and we like we flip on, he flips on the light and then I go in and I accidentally flip on the light even though it's already on, just out of force of habit. I mean, what if I actually accidentally like take on some of their characteristics, right? What if I start to become, lazy or angry or unattractive or boring or annoying, like he is, because, we did the same thing. Do you think that most logical person in your life would go, oh yeah, that's for sure going to happen. That's super likely. I've heard it all the time. It's on the news. It's crazy. Be sure to avoid that. Or you should be sure to wash your hands, avoid that light. You should turn around in a circle. You should tap that wall of that thing 3 times. Or you should, think about a time that you were certain about who you were so you can be concretely anchored in who you are. Is that likely to happen? Or perhaps is that reasonable, logical, rational person going to say something else? And I'm willing to bet they're going to say something else, right? So, that's where we want to start to challenge this. But when we start to kind of push against someone who has really rigid beliefs, and we're dealing with kind of a delusional component to it, we're not really going to be convincing them that their irrational thoughts, as irrational as they are likely to be changed. And it can be really hard for family members and loved ones. It's hard for a clinician to kind of work with that process. It's not impossible, and I'm going to go into some ways that we can kind of do that. And for the listener out there or the questioner out there who's wondering about this, I don't know if this has to do with you or has to do with a family member or loved one, or if you're a clinician and you're kind of thinking about how to work with clients on this. Either way, all this is information on how that we can kind of work with this. And if you're a family member, think about it from a clinician's perspective. I also want to talk about space in a bit, not the thing above us or all around us, I suppose. But anyways, I'll get into it. All right. So when we're talking about challenging somebody's fixed beliefs, Again, we're not going to talk them out of it, but ERP can still work. And what I do with challenging their thoughts is I don't really challenge their thoughts. I usually get into more motivational interviewing, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I really want to focus on whether or not they'd be willing to do some behavioral experiments, right? So we're going to do some experiments. We're going to see what actually happens, right? And we frame it in this way rather than viewing it as exposure and response prevention, as like, hey, we're going to slowly but surely in a methodical way do the thing and practice this thing over and over and over again to really reinforce this idea that this is unlikely to happen, to show that you can handle the anxiety, and that we can really build on that learning process. And if you're a habituation mindset person, that we habituate to that situation and we find that it's unlikely to happen, right? Anyhow, the behavioral experiments we can do are really focused on that individual's ability to kind of do something different and observe what the results were, right? So it's we're gonna like for someone who may have rigid beliefs when it comes to emotional contamination, I might say, you know what, I hear that you're really scared of this, and it's a bother, and it's causing you a lot of stress, and it's causing your family a lot of distress as well. But why don't we put this to the test, right? You've been avoiding that doorknob, or you've been avoiding being in the same room as him for a long time, right? What if we were to just try an experiment? I want to see if what results actually come from this. What actually happens, right? So let's say, how long do we have to be in the room with your brother before you start to take on his characteristics, right? And what characteristics, and how would we start to notice them? So we're developing kind of a theory, a hypothesis with them. Like if then, right? If I do this, then this will happen. We're going to say, great, well, we're going to put that to the test. And I want to see if it happens even a little bit or happens a lot, and if it happens in the time frame that you fear. Now, through the motivational interviewing, hopefully we can get them on board with trying this. But part of the idea is, instead of viewing it as, building a hierarchy and slowly going down it, we're just going to start kind of small and just starting with what they're willing to do and put it as these like discrete experiments, right? And seeing if it happened there or not. And if it didn't, well, maybe we can do something different next time. Maybe next time we can do a slightly different experiment, right? Well, maybe it wasn't in that context, but maybe it's this one. Great. Well, let's put that to the test and see if we can do this. Now, this is a similar approach to treating someone with OCPD, or obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's a kind of related disorder where someone, I kind of view it as this. It's where someone believes that something should be done in a certain way, and why wouldn't it be done any other way? It ought to be done this way, right? The desk ought to be organized like that. My office should be decorated like this. Why wouldn't it be any other way, right? The refrigerator should be done this way. We should be coming in the house and putting our shoes over here in a very specific way, because obviously that's true. The person who is most bothered by that, or the people in this case, is everyone around that person. The individual with OCPD usually isn't as bugged by it because it's idiosyncratic to them. Whereas with OCD, it's the individual who has the obsessions that is the most pained by it. All right, so, and there will be situations and contexts where all that's different, but you get the idea. All right, so let's see here. All right, so let's talk then a little bit about motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing is a therapeutic approach where you're helping someone to make changes in their life. We are not in this process pushing really hard or pushing really at all to get them to change. And instead, the job as the clinician, my job is to try to help reflect back kind of the pros and cons of the situation, to kind of gauge their willingness to make some changes in their life. And if they're willing to make some changes, how much changes, how fast, and how much, or if they're not, to recognize the consequences of not changing, and recognizing that some of that pain and struggle and discomfort is going to kind of remain despite that happening. But despite, or not despite, it's going to change because of their unwillingness to change, right? So again, we're not pushing someone to make that change, but nor are we assuming someone is ready to change, right? So listener out there, or you out there, notice that like everyone's kind of different, and every day, every moment can be different on what we're willing to do and how much we're willing to challenge ourselves, right? I mean, some days we're ready to go and make those changes, and some days we're like, no, I'm not here for it, right? I like to think about motivation to change. Like January 1st, January 2nd, like the gym is full. Everyone's there. It's a bajillion people. Everyone's like, new year, new me. Let's go. Lose those pounds. Get healthy. All that stuff. The end of January, it's a ghost town, right? Because people have lost their motivation, right? So people are going to be different, and we're going to have different times in our life when we're ready. So we respect that. We want to recognize that they're going to go at their pace. But part of my job as a clinician is to reflect back to them. What would it take for them to make those changes? What's their willingness? What would change their willingness, and et cetera, et cetera. This is a more complicated approach than I'm putting out here, but I'll kind of give you some ideas of things that you can think about if you're a loved one who wants to kind of help someone in their life who's struggling. This can be some ways to do that, some ideas to do that. Or if you're a clinician, this is just one approach. So again, I'm going to try to help this person kind of. One thing I want to do is I want to help them consider their reasons for change versus the justification for staying the same, right? And that there are going to be pros to both and consequences to both, and that's the reality to it. It's not like change is going to be great all the time. It is going to come at a cost. So everyone out there listening, for those of you who are struggling with your obsessions and are wondering what to do with it, you recognize that in order to make a change, to overcome or to face your fear, it's going to come with a lot. Sometimes it just comes with the discomfort of doing it. Certainly it comes with that fear of like, well, what if that thing actually happens? What if I actually do hurt someone or hurt myself? Or what if I offend God? Or what if I get sick? Or what if I get sick and get somebody else sick? Right? There's a lot of those potential consequences that someone has to work through. But with that process, there's also, it can also be, gosh, if I face this fear and I overcome my obsessions, well, I have to become a different person. And not in the emotional contamination sense, but for so long, for some people, they've identified as that person with OCD. They're the anxious person, they're the OCD person. They're the, pardon the word, but for some of us, we use it like, I'm the weird person, I'm the crazy person, I'm the eccentric person, right? I'm the person who washes their hands a lot, like fill in the blank, right? We can over-identify with this. So now, if you're not that, now what are you? And I'll be honest, I have a sneaking suspicion that, there's some elements of that, especially in the world of social media and the validation that people get of, having people online say, you can do it, you got this, and I'm here for it, and I'm going to say it too. That's a lot of validation and a lot of eyes and a lot of encouragement and a lot of socializing that we get from that. Now, this is, there's more of a soapbox and more nuance that we can talk about that. But that is a legitimate obstacle in the way for recovery for some people. Not everybody, but for some, right? So as we kind of continue to look at this, all right, so we're going to look at the pros and cons, and let's look at the pros and cons for emotional contamination, right? So the pros and cons of like challenging their obsessions and changing, right? I mean, one, maybe they're able to move around the house more. Maybe they can interact with their family better. Maybe for some people, it's going to be they can they can stay in their major, right? They can go into the building at college. Maybe they can now apply for college. They can stay in their same job. They can apply for a new job, right? There's a lot of change that can happen, which is great, right? But there's going to be that consequence of like, well, what if I do become that person? What if I do take on those characteristics? What if I do? What if I stop being myself? Well, there's that potential consequence, and we can put this in the frame of let's say it's religious scrupulosity, right? So religious scrupulosity is OCD about one's faith. All right, the change of pushing against their obsessions and their compulsions of like praying for 5 hours a day and reading the Bible 10 hours a day and apologizing for everything and being extremely careful about what they're doing and what they're touching and how they're interacting with other people and then ruminating about what they said and how they said it and repentance and all that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of freedom in saying I'm going to drop all that, and I'm going to be like the average person at my church or my synagogue or my mosque, and I'm just going to do what is called of me from my faith, and not more and not less, but certainly not more. The consequences, though, and the reason that people stay the same are, well, what if I go to hell? Right? What if I offend God? What if I blaspheme God? What if I do the wrong thing and you know, you get the idea. All right. So, what about staying the same? Not changing a single thing. I mean, there's a big reason to stay the same. Safety. I know that I'm safe. Nothing bad's going to happen. I'm good, right? But we've talked about OCD as this golden cage. It keeps you in. It's safe. It's nice because you're not experiencing whatever it is that you're afraid of experiencing, but you're limited. You can't live the fullness of life that other people seem to be doing, but it's there, right? So those are those consequences, right? But again, you're safe, but maybe you are going to have to quit that job. Maybe you aren't going to have to. Maybe you aren't going to be able to go to college, get that major, meet that person, talk to that friend over there. Maybe you're not going to be able to hang out with your family as much, and maybe that's worth it to you. And again, part of motivational interviewing is talking about those pros and cons. When you're working with someone with motivational interviewing, you want to help them make that change talk, right? What would they get out of this, right? Sometimes when we push on someone who has this rigid belief, they dig their heels in, right? Think about anybody who has any sort of belief that is different than yours, right? Gosh, God knows the politics is that, right? If you come hard at someone and tell them that they're wrong, and I don't care what side we're on with this, if you come hard and say they're wrong, they're going to dig their heels into their beliefs, defend them, and then fight back against yours, right? Instead, we're not going to try to force them to change or force them to, but we can talk about what's limiting them in their life, what they would gain from changing, right? You can, kind of say like, hey, to that person, make my argument, right? I would love for you to not have to avoid your brother, your cousin, your dad, your mom, whoever it is, right? Or that person at school, your old roommate, or the idea of your old roommate. I want you to have that freedom. I want that for you. Make my argument for me, right? What do you think my argument would be for making that change? See what they have to say, right? You want to help them kind of think about change and just experiment with being in that headspace of change and doing something different and what that would feel like and the optimism that sometimes comes from it. And when they hit on the optimism, you go, yeah, that's right, you should do that. Like, you go, oh, that's an interesting idea. Like maybe, like let's go with that. Let's think more about that. And when they go back into digging their heels, like, yeah, I saw that digging their heels in, or saw you digging your heels in. What caused you to think about that, and then kind of shifting back into that change talk, right? There's something called scaling questions that happens with motivational interviewing. We say like, all right, how ready are you to make these changes, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 is like you're totally ready to go. It might be like they're on a 6, right? Oh, great, you're a 6. What would make you a 7, right? What things would be different to make you a 7? And why are you not a 5? Right? All this is just different ways to think about the idea of change and not viewing it as this binary of ready to go or not. And for the person who has emotional contamination and they're like rigidly in their thoughts, it's like, it's not this I'm ready to change it or I'm not, or I believe it's true or I'm not. It's where are they on that spectrum today, right? Another thing you really want to do is just to reflect somebody's progress and reflect the change that they are making in their life. People want more freedom. They want more agency in their life. They want their choices in life. We want to reflect that, gosh, they seem to be a lot happier with making these changes, right? They seem to be a lot more free. They seem that the weight is off their shoulders a lot more. And I see that a lot and I do my best to reflect that as much as I can in session, because, when you see yourself every single day, you don't really see those changes because it's just kind of happening slowly but surely. But, for someone on the outside, if you're on the outside, it's important to reflect back the changes, the positive changes that you notice in that person, right? Do you see them less tense and less freaked out all the time? Do you see them, happier? Right? Do you see them even if it's you want to? I would try to phrase it as like you seem happier or lighter or more excited or more eager, but phrase it however you need to. So that's kind of motivational interviewing in a nutshell. There's so much more that you can look into with that. And I'm sure somebody out there is saying like, you missed this bit. And I did. But this podcast ain't about perfect. So another thing that you can consider, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm going to encourage anybody who's considering this to go talk to a real doctor on this. But some things I read on this would be to consider, medication. So the first line of approach medication-wise is usually going to be an SSRI. But for someone who has really fixed beliefs, some websites I read talked about having a low dose of antipsychotics, and that kind of helps reduce the rigidity in their thinking. But again, go talk to a doctor on this before you just say that weirdo on the podcast said I need this. All right, lastly is if you have a family member who's struggling and they have a really fixed belief about this, oftentimes there's going to be a lot of accommodation happening through the family, and kind of being permissive about where they can sit and where they don't have to sit and who's going to be there and what they're going to do, and the family makes a lot of changes. So there's an approach called SPACE, and gosh, I wrote the name and I'm going to totally forget the acronym for it. Nope, not even going to try to guess. Point is, go check out Fearcast episode 201. That's where I talk about, or I have an expert on to talk about SPACE and how it works. But ultimately, what it is, it's an approach. It's supportive parenting for anxious childhood experiences. There you go. But the approach SPACE can be used for adults. It can be used for kind of adolescents. It can be used for pretty much anybody. It can be used for loved ones too. And the idea is that it recognizes that we don't change. Oh, okay. My client's not here yet. All right, so we can keep going. All right, so we don't change anybody. We can't force anybody really to do anything. But we, the individual, the family members around them, the loved ones around them, we can make changes to ourselves, right? We can make choices on what we are going to do and what we are not going to do. And what this really gets at is the accommodations that family members and loved ones do around someone who has really fixed and rigid beliefs and are really entrenched in their compulsive habits. We are saying, I'm not going to participate that anymore. So you who's struggling with this are going to make a choice. Either you're going to carry the full weight of this anxiety, or you're going to change. And when you're ready to make a change, we're here for you. We're going to support you. We are not going to judge you or criticize you. There is love and support the entire way. So that's kind of the idea behind this. So in a nutshell, my light went off. All right, we'll wrap this up pretty soon. All right, so so what we want to do is recognize that they can make their right to choose, but what the family does, the person around them, this is the supportive part, is that the family considers like, what are they doing that's accommodating for some of these behaviors? What are they doing that's unhelpful? What are they doing that's giving into and doing the compulsions with that individual? And in a sense, agreeing with the obsession, right? It's kind of negotiating with terrorists in a sense, right? So you compile this list and the family decides, and in collaboration as well with the individual who's struggling, look, we're going to make a change. We, the family, are no longer going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to start cutting these things out in these ways and at this time, and we're going to roll it out in this pace, and we're going to write it out in this letter, read it to that individual, give them a copy of that letter so they know it's coming, they know when it's coming, they know how it's coming, so it's not going to be a surprise. It's going to be hard. It's hard for everybody involved. But it's also saying, we're not going to give in to this. We want you to make this change. We want you to have that freedom and step out of this cage that you're in and to do something different. And maybe that cage also says like, hey, we are not going to do this supportive. We're not going to do your accommodations. But if you want to do some behavioral experiments with us, we'll do that too. And we'll be there with you, and you can do therapy, and we'll support you in that way as well. So, that's just all in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into specifics about what exposures you can do because, again, it sounds like For someone who's really rigidly in their mindset, they're not ready for exposure. So the conversation today isn't going to be about that. It's going to be about how to help address the fixed beliefs, how to help soften it, and how to help that person dream about a life outside of their obsessions and outside of the rigidity that OCD has in their life and the kind of delusional mindset that is slowly taking over but can be fought against. And that's what this conversation is about today. So I hope this was helpful out there for anybody who's listening. I hope to the individual who's struggling with this may be able to think differently or give themselves permission to think differently or a little outside the box. And not to say that you have to change today, but just to experiment with what life could be like outside of it. So I'll leave you with that. For everybody out there, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.